الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I was asked to do a PowerPoint presentation. So I've used an old PowerPoint presentation. Some of it is maybe not necessarily relevant for today's talk, but I'm going to use it anyway because I was told it's good for interaction and people will be more interested in what I'm going to say today. I've put here in terms of the first PowerPoint presentation, there are two big questions. What was there before life and what will occur after life, after this life? In today's presentation, although the discussion is going to be about whether a creator exists or not, or as the title of the poster said, God, Delusion, or reality, I think it's important that we start to understand the context of this question. That this question is not just an academic question whether a creator exists or not. It's not just something that philosophers, academics, they talk about in terms of whether a creator exists and that's it. It's something that goes to the heart of the individual and how the individual views himself and also how the individual views the rest of the world, the rest of society. It shapes the viewpoint on life. So I want to give an analogy, and I might give a few analogies and examples today. You don't really have to look at that, don't worry about that. But the analogy that I want to give is I want you to imagine that you're going to go home after a very long day's, studying at university, at Manchester Metropolitan University, that you're tired, so you go back to your usual house, you go back to your usual bedroom, you go back to your usual bed, you fall asleep straight away, you have a very nice, relaxing sleep. The next day you wake up and you find yourself in a desert. You find yourself in a desert. Before you were at your house, now suddenly you're in the desert. There are going to be natural questions you're going to ask. You're probably going to ask, how the beat did I get here? You might ask the question, what's going to happen to me? You might ask the question, why am I here? These are the three fundamental questions that we all ask if we're in a situation which is completely unfamiliar. How did I get here? Why am I here? What's going to happen to me? And these questions, although the analogy in the scenario is in the desert, these questions are as applicable for us living in this reality as it is as though we have woken up in a desert. Because in reality, you can see, isn't it? When we came from, we came to this reality, this life. How did we get here? We came from non-existence to existence. So the natural question that comes in our mind is, how did we get here? Why are we here? How did we come from non-existence to existence? And what's going to happen to us? And in this question is what's going to happen to us after we die. So there is a natural set of questions that we're going to ask. Just like the one who wakes up in the desert is going to ask, how did I get here? But the problem occurs is that when we ask this question of, why are we here? Like with the person who wakes up in a desert, he might ask this question. That person in the desert, that's a very burning set of questions. How did I get here? What am I doing here? What's going to happen to me? But after a while, he starts to feel a bit hungry. So these thoughts at the forefront of his mind, they start to become at the back of his mind. So he starts looking for food. Then he hears a lion roar. So he gets a bit scared. So suddenly he starts to run away, look for shelter. Then he's looking for water. So what you find is that this person, these very burning questions, these obvious questions suddenly become distracted in that person's mind. He's no longer seen it as an important set of questions. He's got more pressing needs or immediate needs before him. But in reality, all of these actions that he's doing, looking for food, looking for water, looking for shelter, they don't address the fundamental question, which is what brought him there in the first place. And in the same way, we find this with regards to ourselves in this life. We came from non-existence, We suddenly find ourselves in this existence, this life, and we're naturally asking these questions. Why did we get here? How did we get here? What are we doing? What's going to happen to us after we die? But then suddenly we become distracted. We have lectures. We've got to get exams. We've got to get a career. We've got to get a job. We've got to get maybe a car, maybe a driving license. And suddenly, from those burning questions which are the forefront of our mind, they become to the back of our mind. They don't become as important. But I think it's really, it's important to understand that irrespective of our differences and our, distractions in this life, this question still holds as the most fundamental question for us all. Because answering this question, where did we come from? Where are we going? What's our purpose in this life? Actually shapes for us our viewpoint on life and our purpose. Yeah, this is what it does. It will shape for us our viewpoint and purpose to life. And let me give you another analogy, another example. Imagine one day you lose your memory and you find yourself in Lecture Theatre 2, Jeffrey Manton Building, Manchester Metropolitan University, and you're thinking, why am I here? And then you see some people going towards a lecture theatre and you think, you know what, I'll just follow them and go towards that lecture. And maybe you'll start to sit in a lecture and they're talking about chemistry, or they might be talking about computer science, or they might be talking about psychology, and you're there. And then some of your classmates or some of the people around you, they start revising for an exam, so you think, well, I better revise for an exam. Yeah? So this person has no memory. Suddenly, his decision-making process is being determined by what's occurring around him, what people are doing, how people are, going to this particular lecture fair to do this exam, going to this, chilling at this place, going to, the hub that you have here? So, or maybe some Muslims going to the prayer room, and this person just simply follows. Now, in order for that person to understand why he's there at university, what's his purpose of university, he has to ask the question, what came before university life? And he might answer the question by saying what came before university life was that there was my GCSEs, I did my A-levels, I did a GMVQ, whatever it was. It got me qualifications, and these qualifications allowed me to come to a university. And then he has to ask the next question, what comes after university life? And then he thinks to himself, I want to get a career in maybe computer science, maybe a doctor, maybe an engineer, whatever the answer is. As a result of answering those two questions, he now thinks, I should be going to lectures in chemistry, I should be going to lectures in computer science. Yeah? I shouldn't be going to chilling on the night before an exam, I should be revising for the exam. So by answering this question of what came before university life, what comes after university life, shapes how we view our purpose and also priority of being in university. And this is the same question that we need to ask with regards to our life. Because if we don't answer this question of what comes before our life, what comes after life, in order to understand our purpose in life, then we'll be like that person that simply follows where everybody else is going. They're going to that lecture theatre, so I'll go to that lecture theatre. They're doing this particular action, I'll follow and do that particular action. They believe this is right, I'll believe this is right. They believe this is morally wrong, I'll say this is morally wrong. They're not thinking for themselves. And this is where the importance is that you have to think for yourself, and in order to do that, you have to answer this question of where did we come from, and where are we going? Where did we come from before life, and where are we going after life? And I'll give you another example, another analogy. So imagine, and if some of the brothers and sisters or some of the people here have actually seen some of the talks that I've done, you've probably heard these analogies before. So I'll give you another analogy, just to re-emphasize and enforce this particular point. There was a famous example that Voltaire gave, which was a student or a young man, and he's asked to go to war, but his mother is ill. And Voltaire, he uses this example as a way to show how moral decisions are made. Yeah? So I want to give you another example similar to Voltaire's. And this example is that you're at home, your mother is ill, and your friends come round and they say, let's go cinema, let's go, for a chill, let's go to maybe to the nightclubs, whatever it is. Yeah, let's go to the student union bar, whatever, people like to do. And so he's got a dilemma in his mind. Well, this person has a dilemma in their mind. Do they look after their ailing sick mother, or do they go out and have a good time? In order to answer this particular question, like I said, he has to think to himself, what came before life? So he says, what came before life? Nothing. There is nothing before life. I came from non-existence, from dust, and then he answers the question, what comes after life? And he says, nothing. Nothing comes after life. So as a result, he says, the brother's here coming towards me, so I don't know if he's trying to put something on me.
And he said, no, I'm joking. Just going to switch up the mic. So
okay. So this person, he turns around and he thinks to himself, how do I solve this dilemma? Do I look after my ailing mother, or do I go out for a chill? And he says that before life, there was nothing. After life, there is nothing. Yeah? So as a result, he thinks to himself, you know what? YOLO. Everybody knows what YOLO is. I gave a talk one time at a mosque, and it was to youngsters and youth. And I said YOLO, and they didn't have a clue what it meant. Yeah, maybe it's something from a few years ago, and now younger people don't really know what this term is. You only live once. Yeah? So he thinks that I only live once. Therefore, I want to maximize as much pleasure and benefit as possible in this life, because I will not have any other life. I came from nothing, I go to nothing. This is my only life, let me maximize my benefit. This is what he believes. So he thinks to himself, and he looks, and he says, forget my mother. Okay, she's ill, so what? It's about me. It's about myself. It's about maximizing my own pleasures, maximizing my own happiness. I'm going to go and chill with my friends. Or the same person with that same viewpoint on life might turn around and say, well, actually, if I don't look after my mother, who's going to cook my food tomorrow? Who's going to clean my clothes? Who's going to iron my clothes? Yeah, who's going to have the biryani ready after I come back from university? So he thinks, I'm going to look after my mother. In this scenario, what do you find? You find that they may have changed their perception of what benefit is, but the viewpoint on life was the same. And that viewpoint on life was built upon his understanding of what comes before life and what comes after life. Now, let's take the same scenario, and let's say he answers the question differently. And he says that what comes before life? There is a creator. The creator created the universe, including myself. The creator created my instincts, my needs to perform actions. What comes after life? There is a day of judgment. Yeah? There is questioning on how I satisfied my instincts, how I satisfied and performed the actions that I performed. So now he views life in a different way. It's no longer to satisfy myself, maximize my own benefit. Rather, it is, what does the Creator want me to do? So in this scenario now, he might say, actually, the Creator wants me to look after my mother. So he has a different viewpoint on life. And that action now is predicated upon this belief set. So this is what we understand of the importance of answering this idea of why do we adopt the ideas, what is our purpose of life? Because that will help us to understand why we adopt the ideas that we adopt. Why do we have these moral criteria that we have in our mind? Now today, I want to talk about purpose of, the first of these questions. So the first question is, what came before life? Yeah? And I'm probably not going to touch in the talk, in the presentation, about the second question, which is what comes after life. So in this first question, what comes before life? Yeah? I'm asking the question, does a creator exist or not? And remember as well, this question about does a creator exist or not is not just simply a religious question that religious people, theologians looked at. This question about whether a creator exists or not was a question that moral and political philosophers looked at first before they developed their moral and political philosophies. Whether that was Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mills, or later on Karl Marx, they looked at this question that shaped their moral viewpoint, which then shaped their views towards politics, society, and economics. That's why this question is so important. So we're going to look at the first question. The question then becomes, okay, does a creator exist or not? And we want to say, how do we approach this question? How do we try to answer this question? Do we answer it through emotions? Do we answer it through science? Or do we answer it through rationalism or rational deduction, deductive arguments? Yeah. The first thing in regards to emotions. As we know, I think most of the audience members here are Muslim. So as many of us know, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet of Islam, he said that human beings are born upon fitrah. Fitrah here means innate nature. The innate nature that seeks to believe in something more than just material things around us. And in the Quran, it mentions and gives an example of this. It talks about the example of a ship and be a person on a ship in a stormy sea. And the sea is battering the ship. And the person gets very, very scared. I don't know if many of you have been on ships in a storm. Yeah? It's a very scary thing. The waves look massive and the ship looks very small. Yeah? Maybe another example would be somebody who's been on a plane and the plane hits turbulence. Yeah? And everybody can start going, Allahu Akbar, Subhanallah, Subhanallah. They may start making adhkar. Yeah? If they're Muslims, or they might start doing other types of things. And there's a saying, a well-known saying, there are no atheists on a sinking ship. Why? Because as the Quran mentions, that when that person's in that state upon the ship that's facing all these difficulties and problems, he starts to recognize his weak, limited nature. And he starts to call upon hope for some sort of salvation. And the salvation doesn't come from the physical world now. For himself, it comes to the Creator, or God, or whatever he's worshipping. And so we see this within the fitrah, within the innate nature of human beings. And it's not just Muslims who have this. Everybody has this. I'll give you another example. Anybody heard of Paul Ince? Paul Ince? Okay, one person. Footballer, yeah, all two. He was a famous footballer. Yeah? From, he used to play for Man United, later on for Liverpool, into Milan. And he used to have this superstition. And the superstition was what? That he wouldn't put on his shirt until he got onto the pitch. He used to think, you know what? If I don't put the shirt on, if I put the shirt on before I go onto the pitch, I'm going to play badly. Everybody heard of Ander Herrera? Yeah, another example. Yeah, Ander Herrera, he wears the shin pads that he wore when he was 10 years of age, because he thinks it's his lucky shin pads. Yeah, what is occurring here with regards to these footballers? It's that innate nature, that wanting to see something more than material, wanting to connect to something which is spiritual. Yeah, wanting to effectively worship. In this way, it's being deconstructed to things like lucky shirts or lucky totems or lucky shin pads. Yeah, and we also see this in regards to when we face exams. You know, it's interesting that when people face exams the night before, particularly when they've not studied and they know they've not studied, they become very philosophical. Yeah, late at night. They start saying, is this what my purpose of life is? There must be more than life in this. Yeah? And on the day of the exam, you have people, especially Muslims, they'll be saying that Qul's in it, Qul Allahu Samad. Yeah, repeating the Afkar, trying to get some spiritual power, yeah, some sort of, divine will to help him in the questions. And you find this even amongst others. Even non-Muslims, they'll bring in their lucky pen. They'll have their lucky mascots. They think that something within this has some sort of spiritual power that is able to control the affairs, solve this problem. So we understand that, yes, human beings have an innate nature. And in fact, by the way, this isn't something that just some people, religious people talk about the innate nature. This is something that a lot of people talk about. Gene Hammer talked about it in terms of the God gene. Yeah? Durkheim, Max Weber. They talk about the phenomena that exists of people believing in religious ideas and religious values They give a particular explanation why. So, for example, there was a study done that showed that there's a particular region of the brain that lights up when a person's seeking some sort of spiritual or feeling some sort of spirituality. There may be these various arguments that people use in order to explain why the phenomena exists. But in reality, we can sense that the phenomena exists, that people want to worship, want to see something more than matter, sanctify, reverse things. And just as a final point on that, even in societies that were communist and atheist, like the Soviet Union, like North Korea, like to a certain extent China now, particularly Soviet Union in the early years, where they banned religion and they prohibited belief in God because they said, belief or religious beliefs was an opium of the masses. It retarded progress and growth. So even in these societies, they weren't able to remove the belief in Creator from the people. And even those people who proclaimed to be atheists, they diverted the atheism to venerating and revering their own political and philosophical political figures. Like, for example, Lenin's body was preserved. And they used to go and visit Lenin's body. From a communist atheist perspective, dead body is no different to a rock. They both matter. But yet they would preserve it. They would go and visit it. And as Muslims would know this, they would make tawaf around it. Yeah? They would orbit it, walk around it, out of respect. In North Korea, the founding father of the communist state in North Korea, they preserved his body and they make ruku to it. They bow to it out of respect. So what you find is that even in societies that try to remove religion, what happens is that you still have this religiosity that comes out, this desire. And in fact, so as we know, Soviet Union, they had to reinstitute the church. They had to allow people to worship again. And so they weren't able to get rid of it from the psyche and the mentality and the personalities of the people. So the question then becomes, okay, emotions, fitra, we do have this, but we can't just use the fitra on its own. The emotions on its own might lead to different conclusions. So we need something to guide the emotions. And that's the rational or the thinking process. And this thinking process, by the way, is something that is emphasized within the Quran and has been spoken about by the scholars who made tafsir or explanations of the verses of Quran, the Quran being the book that the Muslims refer to. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran it states, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ and فَعْلَمْ and have knowledge that there is none worthy of worship except Allah. Imam Juwayni, rahimahullah, he was a famous scholar of Islam from 1,000 years ago. He was a teacher of Imam Ghazali. And he was also known as Imam al-Haramain, the Imam of the two holy mosques, Mecca and Medina at his time. He explained this verse in his book Al-Irshad. And he said that this verse commands every sane adult to believe, to prove to themselves that Allah exists, that the Creator exists, and that the Quran is the word of the Creator. Now this is what he said. He said, why? Because the command is to have ilm, is to have knowledge. In Arabic you say ilm. And ilm in the Arabic language means to have knowledge with certainty. And then he explained the only way to get certainty is through a rational process. And then he goes on to explain how rationality is a definite thing, it actually exists, we're not skeptics. And then he explains certain processes and then certain arguments in regards to that. So this idea of going back to the Quran and the Quran reinforcing to us that we should be using our mind is something part of the Quranic method. And it's part of our heritage as Muslims, that we believe that you have to go back and prove your belief is correct. Even for a Muslim. Because when Imam Juwayni mentioned this, he wasn't talking about non-Muslims have to go and use their mind. He actually said this is the first obligation upon a Muslim. Yeah, when they reach maturity, yeah, that they have to go and be convinced why they're Muslim through a rational process for that. So I've spoken a lot, and some people might say, well, yeah, we've not even talked about the proof of the existence of the Creator. I came to talk about God, delusion, or truth. But I think it's important that we place the discussion about belief in a Creator in its rightful place. Now, there are two, so we understand one, purpose of life is very important. Secondly, that we have an innate nature that wants to worship. And thirdly, that we need to use some sort of intellectual process in order to guide our innate nature to the correct conclusions about the nature of the universe. So there are two processes. One's through science as a thinking process, and one is through rational thought, or rationalism, or deductive logic, or deductive reasoning. And we need to, when we talk about these two processes of thought, a lot of people, they conflate the two together. And therefore they think that in order to be rational means you have to be scientific. And you can't be rational, which is different to being scientific. That there are two different methodologies of thinking. They think there's only one, and really the only one is science, and that's it. If it's not science, it's not rational. If it's not rational, then it's irrational. And so as a result, they say belief in a Creator is not rational. But what they actually mean is belief in the Creator is not scientific, not empirical. So, what do we mean? We need to break these terms down. What do we mean by science in particular? So, anybody who's doing science at the moment? Only two people. Maybe a few more. Four. So, let's think about, doing science when we're at school. Yeah? And if you remember, you used to have those Bunsen burners. You used to have those tripods, wire gauzes. You'd have a beaker. Yeah? Remember, does that make sort of familiar? And then you were told that when you had to write up a science paper, so maybe you were boiling water, you want to know what the boiling point of water is, that you want to know what the boiling point of water is, then you would turn around and you would say, okay, we have to write it in a particular way. Does anybody know what that particular way was? What would you start off with?
Hypothesis.
I don't think my mic's working. Hypothesis, yeah. Hypothesis. What's the second one? So you write your hypothesis, your aim, your method, results, conclusion. Yeah? Does that make sense? Is it sort of coming back to us now? You used to do those little tables and you do a graph and then you would give a conclusion at the end of it. So you'd have an introduction or an aim or hypothesis. You would have a method. You would then record the effects of your experiment as results, and then you would have a conclusion. That is your scientific method. All science papers, whether you're at school, secondary school, or whether you're doing a postdoctorate, will follow that pattern. Because that's called empiricism, empirical thought. Or that's the approach to scientific method. There may be some tweaks, but that's generally the case. Now, science is really good at telling us how things work in the observable universe. So if I want to know what the boiling point of water is, science is really good for that. If I wanted to know about particles and how they affect other particles, science is really good at that. If I want to know about photosynthesis, science is really good at that. But what science can't do is when things are outside of the experimental range or experimental field. When something is non-observable, non-testable. And some people might turn around and say, yeah, but if it's non-testable, if you can't observe it, it means it doesn't exist. But we make rational judgments on non-observable things all the time. All the time. Let me go back to the example of the person who wakes up in a desert. And he's walking around. And he sees in front of him an oasis. He sees trees, he sees grass, he sees water. He thinks, yes, I'm safe. So he walks towards this oasis in the desert. And he sees in this oasis, he sees a wooden chair. He sees a wooden chair. And he's going to go through certain thought processes. Intuitively, we know what the conclusion is. But let's just go through his thought process. He's going to look at the wooden chair. And he's going to think, could he have grown like that? Could the trees have grown like that? Could the reptiles, the snakes and the scorpions fashion the chair? No. Or is it the case that there must be an intelligence that produced that chair? And he's going to come to that third conclusion. There must be intelligence. Why does he come to the conclusion there must be an intelligence? Well, yeah, obviously he's seen chairs before, and he knows that chairs are made and created, but he's never seen that particular chair before, and he's never seen that particular chair being created, but yet his conclusion would be rational. Even though he's never seen the person who's made the chair. He's outside of the experimental field, but he can make these conclusions. And in fact, if we go into a little bit more depth about what he's actually doing, he's thinking, okay, the chair is made out of wood. But just because I've got wood, does it mean I have a chair? No. Just because I've got wood doesn't mean I have a chair, because the wood could be a table. The wood could be a cup. The wood could be any number of possible things. Yeah? Just because you've got wood doesn't mean you're going to have a table. It's not necessary for it to be a chair or a table. So it could be any possible things. So as a result, I understand there must be something other than the chair and other than the wood that caused it to become a chair. Does that make sense? That's what he's thinking. Similarly, if you look at a painting like the Mona Lisa, and you know that the paint, just because you've got paint and a canvas doesn't mean you have Mona Lisa, the painting. You need something other than the painting, other than the canvas, in order to have that particular painting. And even though we have never seen, was it Leonardo, what's his name? Leonardo da Vinci. I was going to say Leonardo DiCaprio though. So even though we've never seen Da Vinci, no human being's been alive who saw Da Vinci today. No human being has ever seen him paint Mona Lisa. But yet we know rationally that he painted it. In fact, how do we know rationally he painted it? Not through any science, but through testimonial evidence. One generation reports from the next generation, reports to the next generation, that he painted it. And we accept that. So when people say, if it's not scientific, it means it's not rational, we make lots of rational decisions without them being scientific. I don't know why I'm going through this, but I'm just So anyway, so what do we mean by rational process? We say rational process is where we make a deductive argument, or we make certain conclusions based upon these four components: reality, senses, the brain, and previous information. Any rational thought will have to have one of these, or not one, all of these processes to take place. And I'll explain a bit further in terms of what we mean and how we use this. But just to give you an example, if I was to ask you, how would you describe the colour red to a blind man? You wouldn't be able to, would you? Because the person's blind, so he doesn't have the reality. So he needs to have reality in order to comprehend colour, like the chairs are green. Yeah? Similarly, if I was to ask you the question, what does Coke taste like? Coca-Cola Coke, not the other Coke. What does Coke taste like? You say, well, Coke tastes like Coke. Yeah. Or you might turn around and say, it tastes fizzy. Yeah, it tastes sweet. It has a bit of caramel in there. So you're using previously sensed reality that you stored in your mind to describe the reality. And obviously you need senses in order to sense it, and you need a brain that will link the reality to the previous information. This is what we mean by the rational thought process, which is different to a scientific process. So to continue very quickly. So now we understand, okay, we can use something other than science called rationality. And now that we can look at, that we need to have a reality to sense in order to make certain conclusions, we look at this issue of the belief in the Creator, certain arguments that people use for the belief in the Creator. One of the arguments is, which is one that I use, and there's many different arguments that people use, like the Kalam cosmological argument, whatever begins to exist as a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause, or things are possible beings that need necessary beings, or this one which is limited and dependent, things are limited, things are dependent. These are various arguments. But let me just go back to that example of the wooden chair. as an example. Yeah? We said just because you've got wood doesn't mean you have a chair. And because you know that the chair must have been determined by somebody. Because I'll give you another example. I have a red triangle. I know by necessity a triangle has 3 sides. So it won't be a triangle if it has 4 sides, would it? No. But I know it's only possible for it to have a red colour because it could have a green colour, it could have a black colour, it could have a white colour. It could have any numerous number of colours. Because I understand that the red triangle could have a number of different colours, but it's red, then the redness must have been determined by something other than the triangle. The 3 lines, it having 3 sides, is something that's determined by the triangle, isn't it? But the colour red is not determined by the triangle. So there must be somebody that have imposed upon the triangle the colour red. So this is the process that we're going to use. Now, when we sense the reality now, when we sense the things within the nature, within the universe, we sense that it has 2 components. One, that it's limited, it has certain attributes, and secondly, that it's dependent. It depends upon something else for its existence. And, for example, if I take my phone here, the phone has a certain size, has a certain shape, has a certain energy output. It's limited. It has certain limitations, has certain attributes. When it comes to the issue of charging, it's very limited in terms of its battery power, isn't it? As anyone who has a smartphone will know, you have to charge it every 4 or 5 hours. So we also know it's dependent as well. It requires something else. So just like the chair, just like the red triangle, we can sense that it has these limitations, has these attributes, has these dependencies. And I'm just going to go through a particular argument to show that from this phone, which is limited and dependent, you need to have a creator, which is a necessary being. So how can I prove that? Well, like I said, it's limited, and second thing is, it's dependent. It depends upon something else. What does the phone depend upon? Anybody? Battery. And where does the battery get its electricity from? The plug's the charger. So we know that the phone is dependent upon the charger. The charger itself is limited. The charger itself won't work unless it's plugged in. It's dependent. The dependency of the charger is being plugged in is dependent upon electricity to supply the mobile phone. Again, if people have listened to some of the talks that I've done before, some of the brothers that have done talks before will have heard this example before. So electricity. What does electricity need? What does electricity need? It needs a power plant. Does that make sense? And power plants, they're not unlimited, they're also limited. There's a certain size, certain shape, certain energy that they produce. What are power plants dependent upon? How is electricity made?
Fossil fuels.
Fossil fuels. Very good. So you have to have fossil fuels. So what happens in a power plant is you have fossil fuels that burn, they heat up water, the water produces steam, the steam moves the turbines cause a magnet to rotate around a metal coil, or between a metal coil, and that creates an electrical field. I'll tell you what, you probably weren't realising you're going to get an electron on energy and electromagnetism. But this is how it works. So actually my mobile phone, for it to work, I first needed to plug it in, I needed to have electricity, I needed to have a power plant, I needed to have fossil fuels, I needed that to produce steam in order for my phone to work. So really my phone is steam powered. Steam powered. So the next question becomes, okay, what about the fossil fuels? Where do the fossil fuels come from? Where does the coal, the oil, the gas come from?
Dinosaurs.
Plants. Or fishes, if it's oil. Decayed matter, organic matter. So when you look at these plants that have decayed over millions of years, because they don't just become fossil fuels, you need to still have a process. It's still dependent upon a particular process. This dependency is not determined by itself, by the way. It's part of something that's imposed upon it to make the organic matter, the plants, into fossil fuels. Yeah? So over millions of years. Where do plants, what are they dependent upon? Sunlight. Yeah? Photosynthesis. Remember that one at school. So you need to have light. So for my mobile phone to work, I need to plug it in, I need to wait for the electricity, I need to have a power plant working, I need to have fossil fuels, I need to have it producing steam, I need to have had plants that existed millions of years ago that over a process of pressure and heat became fossil fuels. I need those plants to be dependent upon the sun. So my mobile phone is actually solar powered. Yeah? It's not just steam, it's solar powered. So then we ask the question, what about the sun? Sunlight comes from the sun. Yeah, what's the sun? Again, it's limited. Has a certain size, has a certain shape, has a certain mass, has a certain amount of energy output. And also the sun is dependent. What does the sun depend upon? Is it fusion of hydrogen? Oh yeah, fusion of hydrogen. We've got, was it cosmologist, astronomer? Yeah, mashallah. So yes, the fusion of hydrogen. So it's going into a bit of technicality here, but the technicality is not the important thing. The important thing is to recognize you've got limits and attributes of things that we observe which are dependent. That's the most important thing. Whatever we point to will have those two things. That the limits are not self-created, but they're imposed upon it. So what happens when you have fusion of hydrogen is that, you have this gas and dust that exists within the universe called nebulas. And over, a period of time, these gas and dust comes together, or the gas comes together, hydrogen gas comes together under the force of gravity. And then they start to cause a mass. And then this mass then starts to put pressure upon the core of the core of the star. And the hydrogen gets forced together to produce helium, or heavier atoms. And when you create bonds, what do you do? And in chemistry, you release energy. Creating bonds releases energy. So it actually creates energy, and this energy then is emitted in sunlight and in also heat. And that's what the sun. So we see now that my mobile phone was dependent upon the plug, was dependent upon electricity, was dependent upon power plants, was dependent upon fossil fuels, was dependent upon plants, was dependent upon the sunlight, was dependent upon the sun, was dependent upon the fusion of hydrogen, was dependent upon what? Nebulas. Where do the nebulas, what are they dependent upon? Supernovas. What are the supernovas ultimately dependent upon? Some people say the Big Bang. What is the Big Bang dependent upon? Quantum singularity. What is the quantum singularity dependent upon? Some people talk about membrane structures that collide and create Big Bangs. What are the membrane structures dependent upon? Superstring theory, according to certain physicists. What are the superstring theory dependent upon? It's the supercluster theory. Okay, I'm making it up now. Not the superstring theory, the supercluster theory. So what do we see? Everything in this chain of dependencies has these two qualities. One is that they're limited. They have attributes that they don't determine themselves, but are determined for it. Yeah, just like the chair, the wood did not determine it to be a chair. Just like fusing hydrogen doesn't determine that it's going to create energy. Something that's imposed upon it. That's why they talk about laws of nature. Yeah, what's being imposed upon it. So, I've only got 5 minutes left. So there's certain possibilities now. The first possibility, and I don't know if this is on my next slide. Yeah. Possibility number 1. The universe regresses back forever in an infinite chain of events. Does that make sense? So the phone depends upon this, depends upon this, depends upon this, ad infinitum. Forever. Yeah. Possibility number 1. Some people argue this. Secondly, a second possibility is that there is an eternal cycle of events. For example, the Big Bang goes to a big crunch. Sorry, just to explain this point. The universe, they say, exploded out in a Big Bang. And then reaches a certain point where the force of gravity pushes it back together into what they term a big crunch. Yeah? And then it goes back to that quantum singularity and then explodes out again. And this oscillation occurs forever. The third possibility is the universe came from absolute nothing, And the fourth possibility is that all limited dependent things necessarily require an unlimited independent creator, which is what we as Muslims would call Allah, the creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So why do we say possibility number one is wrong, impossible? And I've only got a couple of minutes left, but really quickly. Possibility one is wrong, is impossible, because, I think it's in the next slide. Firstly, the sum of finite is finite, but we'll leave that one. Think about the dominoes example. If my mobile phone does not work until I have a plug, a charger, and that doesn't work until I have power plants, and that doesn't work until I have fossil fuels, and that doesn't work until I have the sun, and that has to wait for nebulas, and that has to wait for supernovas, and that has to wait for the Big Bang, and that carries on forever, would my mobile phone work? If the chain of events goes back forever and there's no beginning point in time or beginning chain of events, would my mobile phone work? No. Does that make sense? It's like having a row of dominoes. For the last domino to fall, you have to hit by the domino before it. But if you have an infinite row of dominoes, that last domino will be waiting for an infinite amount of time. Meaning it will be waiting forever. It wouldn't work. But thankfully, my mobile phone works, which implies that this chain of events had to have a beginning. But some people might say, yeah, what about the eternal cycle? This cycle of events, the Big Bang to the Big Crunch. And, represented this here like a water cycle. Water, the clouds produce rain, the rain produces water, the water evaporates, produces clouds, and clouds produce more rain. The water cycle is perpetual. Could you not have the perpetual system where everything is dependent on everything else in this cycle, mutual cooperative dependency? The answer is no, you can't. And there's a couple of ways of looking at this. First way is if you go backwards in the cycle, like in the water cycle. So you've got rain. And before you have rain, so before it rains, you need what? You need clouds. Before there's clouds, what do you need? Water. Before water, what did you need? Rain. But it's not rain because there are no clouds. And there's no clouds because there's no water. And the reason why there's no water is because there's no rain. Yeah? So when you go backwards in the cycle, you realize that things will not exist until something initiates the cycle in the first place. So going back to this point about the universe going from a Big Bang to a Big Crunch to a Big Bang to a Big Crunch ad infinitum, it's, the famous analogy is this: what comes first, the chicken or the egg? That makes sense? You can't say that, isn't it? You have to have something that came first. If the chicken depends upon the egg, but the egg depends upon the chicken, then neither the chicken or the egg would exist until one has been initiated. So the eternal cycle is impossible. The third possibility is something from nothing. And a lot of people refer to this point about how you can have something coming from nothing. I'll probably leave this more for the Q&A, but in reality they don't talk about nothing creating something. People like these modern theoretical physicists like Lawrence Krauss, they don't say there's nothing, absolute nothing. They refer to a type of something, or a type of nothing. A nothing that has space, that has equations, and that has the potential for quantum gravity to produce something. They just label it nothing. What they really mean is absence of matter. Not absence of space, absence of time, absence of matter, absence of equations. They don't refer to the absolute nothing. Yes. So what does that leave us with? The only possible conclusion to explain my mobile phone working can't be explained through an infinite chain, cannot be explained through a cycle of events, cannot be explained through something coming from nothing. It only explained by the last possibility, that there must be an infinite, independent, eternal creator, which is summed up in the Quran, in Surah Ikhlas, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Say Allah is one and only, unique. Allah is Samad. Allah is the one whom all things depend, but He depends upon nothing. لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. He neither begets, nor was He begotten, and nothing in creation, nothing is comparable to the Creator. These are the things that we can come to our minds, and this is reinforced by the Quran itself. Inshallah, I will leave it there. for some Q&As. I think we've got 5 minutes for any questions or comments that brothers or sisters or ladies and gentlemen want to ask.
We're going to take a break from Maghrib and
I'll pass it over to the chair.
Inshallah, we're going to take a break now for Maghrib, and the rooms that are available where we can pray is G226, 227, 228, inshallah. And we will resume, inshallah. Anyone has any questions, we can take some questions now and then we can start. Yes, so we have 5 minutes still. What time, Maghrib? Alright, taking past. So we can take some questions, inshallah. So if anyone has any questions. Any questions?
Guys, don't be shy, come on.
yeah.
What if it's something that's not dependent on limited, but it's not Allah?
Okay, so the person in the back is asked the question: what if it's something that's not limited or dependent, but is not not Allah, the creator? Yeah. So when we came to the conclusion that there must be something that's unlimited and independent that created the universe, because limited, dependent things cannot self-sustain themselves, they don't cause themselves, and therefore they require something that's eternal outside of the limitations. We ask another question: could this be a mechanical force, this eternal being? Or is it a sentient force? Meaning, is it self-aware, knows what it's doing in creating the universe? And we say it's the latter rather than the former. It's sentient, it's self-aware. Why do we say that? We say that because of a number of reasons, but one argument or one reason is that we know the universe is temporal. Means we know the universe began to exist. It began to exist 13.78 billion years ago. We also know, because of the chain of events cannot go back forever, it must have a beginning as well. So we know the universe began to exist. But this creator is eternal. If the creator does not choose to create, it means the creator is compelled to create. If the creator is eternal, i.e. the cause is eternal, then the effect will also be eternal. But the effect here, which is the universe, is not eternal, rather it's temporal. So for example, if I switch on the light, you would expect when you turn the switch on, there would be light. If I turn the switch on, and sometimes the light switches on 2 seconds later, sometimes it switches on 4 seconds later, you're going to be thinking, brother, he's messing around with the computer and he's messing around with the lights. Somebody's deciding, and it's not the light that's deciding, necessary. So there's a choice that's taking place. So because we have a temporal effect with eternal cause, it means the cause chose at that moment to create and was not compelled to create from eternality. Does that make sense?
Any questions? Anyone else?
Okay, I'm just loading up Slido. It's like an anonymous type of place where you can ask questions online. There will be a code up, inshallah. It probably will be set up after Maghrib, so if you do have any questions and you want it to be anonymous, do wait till Maghrib time, inshallah.
Yes, sister.
There's a few books and articles out there. Interestingly, a lot of the Muslim scholars of the past wrote about this. So in the book by Imam Ghazali, Ihya Ulumuddin, which is in 3 volumes, I think it's in the 2nd volume, where he talks about these 3 different arguments. He talks about 3 different proofs for the existence of the Creator. One was an argument by design. One was the argument to say that the universe was temporal, had a beginning to its existence. And another argument that he used was a contingency argument, which is that things that exist are only possible things. They don't have to exist. Like when I boil water, it boils at 100 degrees Celsius, but that's only a possible value. It could boil at 110. It's not the water that's determining it, what it should boil at. So it could be at any value. So there must be something outside of the water, therefore outside of nature, that determines that the water should boil at this particular centigrade. Yeah. So he discusses that. Obviously, Imam Juwayni, he talks about some of the proofs of the existence of the Creator in his book Al-Irshad, which is also translated into English. And the modern philosopher today, William Lane Craig, actually borrows heavily from the arguments of Imam Ghazali, Imam Juwayni, Ibn Hazm, many of the early Muslim scholars. That's why the title of his book is called Kalam, Cosmological Argument, and he uses some of these arguments. I think also there's a brother called Hamza Sources, he wrote a book called The Divine Reality as well. So there's a number of different lectures, books, articles that are written out there, and those are just three that I can think of. Does not stop me and I do the action, then I'm accountable for it because I chose to do the action. Yeah? So I do actions based upon the permission of the Creator. Yeah? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Creator in the Quran, mentions this point, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed to the children of Adam the two paths, guidance and misguidance, and allowed us to make the choice by His permission, whether we choose guidance or whether we choose misguidance. This is part of our free will that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created within us.
Second question we have here is, how do we comprehend God, a being greater than creation, with our limited understanding and our logic that we've come to understand as the truth?
Okay, it's a good question actually. Right, okay, so let's go back to that desert example. In the oasis, we find a chair made out of wood. I automatically understand that somebody must have designed it. Yeah, so I've come to the conclusion because of the implication of the observed event, which is the wooden chair. There must be an intelligence behind it. Somebody must have created it, or somebody must have fashioned it. Now, is it a man? Is it a woman? Does the person have blue eyes? Do they have brown eyes? I don't know, because that's beyond my sense capacity. I can't sense that from the chair alone. Yeah, the chair's not going to tell me what colour hair the person has. But what I can come to the conclusion is that somebody did cause that chair, yeah, or produce that chair. In the same way, when it comes to the belief in the Creator, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the implications of the observed events, from the fact that things are limited and dependent and that they require an unlimited independent Creator who freely chose to create the universe, I can come to that conclusion. But the other conclusions I can't come to. For example, we have, as I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, we have within ourselves the fitrah, the innate nature that wants to worship, that wants to revere the Creator. But I don't know how to revere the Creator. I don't know what the Creator wants from me. So I need communication from the Creator. So I need to be told how to worship the Creator. And that comes in the form of the message, and that comes in the form of having messengers that are sent from time to time. The last of them was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may peace and blessings be upon him, who was sent with the message which was the Quran. So I can't comprehend in my limited mind the nature of the Creator by observing the creation. I can apprehend the existence of God. I cannot comprehend the existence of God. I cannot comprehend the existence of the Creator. Yeah, that's beyond the capacity of my mind, because one, it's outside of my direct sensation. Secondly, my mind is limited. Thirdly, I only observe things which are limited and dependent, and that's my reference point about how to understand the reality, is through limited dependent things, and the Creator is beyond that. So I have no reference point. It's like, for example, just as a quick example of this, it's like when I ask the question, what does chicken taste like? What does chicken taste like? Exactly. You can only refer to it from your framework, from your reference point. If chicken just tastes like chicken, you can only say, well, it tastes like chicken. Yeah? You can't say it tastes something else, because that's your reference point. If our reference point is the observable reality, which is limited, finite, and dependent, then I cannot now comprehend an unlimited independent creator. And in fact, the fact that we cannot comprehend actually produces more surety in our hearts that it's actually the correct creator that we are worshipping. Because if we could comprehend the creator, visualize the creator, then what we are doing is visualizing forms of creation. Yeah? Limited things. And therefore that wouldn't be the creator.
Next question. Some people say there are scientific errors in the Quran. What would you say in response to this interesting question?
Okay, it depends. Okay, so there's a way of understanding, as a general framework. Obviously, there are certain examples, and we can look at the details of those particular examples that they claim are quote-unquote scientific errors. But there's a general framework. The first framework to understand is this, is that science is what we call an inductive process. Yeah? Inductive means that it's from particular experience that we come to the conclusion that there is a generalized conclusion. Let me give you an example of this. It's a very famous example. If I've only observed white swans, what am I going to generalize about swans? They're all white. How do I know that all swans are white? Is because I saw one there, I saw one there, I saw one there, I saw one there, and I generalize. That's called induction. Yeah? And that's what science does. It takes one experiment, second experiment, third experiment, repeats it, and then generalizes. So it can never be 100% certain. So for example, I can say water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, but am I definitely certain that all water boils at 100 degrees Celsius? No, because I've never experienced all water. I might have experienced my kettle at home, my Bunsen burner boiling the water in the glass beaker. Yeah, I might have done various experiments. I might have done 1 billion experiments, but it's still not all water. Yeah, unless I've sensed the whole of the universe and all water that exists in the universe and tested its boiling points at room conditions. I can't say that. So as a result, science has always got a degree of error or possibility of error within it. And I'll give you one other example of this. One of the most popular medicines that are given out is aspirin 75 milligram. Now aspirin 75 milligram is given out because it thins the blood. Yeah? And when it thins the blood, it prevents heart attacks or strokes. And so anybody who's got diabetes, anybody who's got a heart condition, anybody who's got potential stroke are given aspirin 75 milligram. Millions of patients, tens of millions of patients will be on this medication worldwide. Yeah? Any medicines that are licensed for a particular treatment undergo 10 years worth of experimentation. 10 years. So I've got to go quicker, so I'm just insane. So there's a lot of science that goes into testing it. A couple of months ago, they did a meta-analysis, which means a large analysis of aspirin 75 milligram. Even though millions of doctors or hundreds of thousands of doctors in this country supply this as a medicine, guess what they found out? After decades of giving this as a medicine for potential to prevent strokes and heart attacks, what did they find out? Actually, the harm is greater than its benefit. Yeah, and doctors shouldn't be prescribing it. So what does that tell us? Is even the most scientifically verifiable aspect, like medicine, there's still a possibility of error within that. So if you've got a conflict between what the science says and what's mentioned in the Quran, understand that science has a potential error, whereas what we believe what's within the Quran is definitive by other methodology to prove it. Yeah.
Next question is, how much of belief is spiritual and how much is rational? How do you convey the spiritual side effectively?
Okay. So let me give you an example of this. Imam Ghazali, he gives an example, and he talks about the emotions, and he talks about the relationship that has with the mind. And he gives an example of the horse and the jockey, the one who rides the horse. He says the horse is like the emotions. And if you let the horse go, it'll go in every single different direction. And if you just got the jockey, he will take ages to finish the course. So the best thing to do is have the jockey that rides upon the horse. Meaning you have the emotions that's guided by the intellect. So this is what we do. So we have emotions. We are human beings. Yeah? We have this innate nature. We are any spiritual people. But what we do is we don't just worship anything. Hug a tree. Yeah? Rather, we understand what the mind directs us to, where our worship and spirituality should be, which is the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, unlimited, independent, etc.
We're going to take 2 minutes each question then, inshallah, yeah? If everything is predestined, why isn't everyone written for Jannah? 2 minutes.
So he wants to summarize Al-Qadar again in 2 minutes. Okay, really, look, when we look at this particular question about, if everything's predestined, it's like we're looking at the question from the point of view of the Creator and trying to understand creation. Yeah? And we can't do that. When I looked at the belief in the Creator, I said, let's start from what we sense and we go back to the Creator. And in fact, this is similar to the 2 previous questions, but one of those questions was, how can we comprehend the nature of the Creator? We can't. So when we look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all-knowing, He knows future events, past events, present events, we can't comprehend that. It's beyond our comprehension because we think in temporal steps, past, present and future. So we can't make these types of these types of mental gymnastics or these leaps in order to try to understand what the Creator is, how the Creator thinks, and then apply it on creation. Rather, we go from creation and we come to the conclusion of the Creator. And then whatever the Creator tells us within the text, that's what we submit to. Because we believe the Creator knows better than we ourselves. Yeah.
Next question is, what is the correct term to use to someone who has accepted Islam, revert or convert?
I think it's whatever the brother or sister wants to refer to themselves by. There's no
Gender fluid.
Yeah. So if they want to call themselves converts, that's fine. If they want to call themselves reverts because they've reverted back to their fitrah, that's fine. I think there used to be back in the day, I remember when I was in university myself, there used to be this big thing, don't say convert, they're reverts, they're going back to their fitrah. And apparently I think it's changed now, everybody wants to be called converts. Yeah. It's a convert. So I think it's not a major issue. Yeah.
Why do you have to choose which prayer times you want to follow in the same area location? There can be a major difference in the time of the same prayer.
We'll skip that.
We're going to skip this question because it's not related to the topic. Next question. God knows everything. He is all-knowing. So why is it that some people are allowed to sin, or why are some allowed to do good?
Similar answer to my previous question, which is that, look, yeah, we know that God is all-knowing. He knows what's going to happen in terms of whether we are going to commit sin or not. If the Creator says, actually, I'm going to stop all people from committing sin. If the Creator does this, then what will happen is you won't have free will. And maybe it's the case that in order to allow people to sin and commit evil, that will allow people to make independent, moral, just judgments. Yeah? That's the only, effectively that's the only way. And maybe that's how the Creator wanted to create the universe, where human beings are able to make moral judgments and therefore choose to come to the worship of the Creator or choose to reject that.
Famous question, why does God allow evil to exist?
Okay, so similar answer to the previous one. If God prevented all evil, yeah, think about it, God prevented all evil, then that means that no person can commit a sin, no person can maybe kill, no person can commit a morally wrong action. If God prevents anybody from the capacity to commit any morally wrong action, that would mean that you would have no free will. Yeah? And that defeats the purpose of our purpose of life. The purpose of life is not to create this world as a Jannah, as a heaven, where it's perfect. The purpose of this life, as the Quran mentions, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, is we are here to worship. And that means you're tested by difficulty. You're tested by other people. You're tested by temptations. You're tested by having the ability to make the choice of committing an evil or committing good. And you know, the reality of this mentality, this perspective on life, is a unique mentality to have. That we're here to be tested, and that the ultimate goodness is with the Creator. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said in a famous narration in Sahih Muslim, he says, strange are the affairs of the believer. When something good happens to him, he's thankful to Allah. And when something bad happens to him and he remains patient, he's rewarded by Allah. Meaning, even when you face difficult circumstances, you're going to get reward. There's an ultimate good at the end of a difficult circumstance. Yeah? So it's a unique viewpoint. Now let's take God out of the question. Let's just say you have an atheist. And an atheist, he believes YOLO, isn't it? You only live once. And in this society, he wants to try and maximize benefit. But he loses his job. He suffers from an earthquake. He loses, some family member. He's miserable. But there's nothing within him to have that psychological comfort to know that there's an ultimate good. And why is it therefore that 1 in 5 people in this country will suffer from depression? 1 in 4 people will suffer from mental illness. One of the most popular ones is anxiety as well. That some of the most popular medicines are citalopram and antidepressants.
The next question, we need to get through it quickly. How do we know whether there are creators or just one creator, so many gods or just one God? We're going to finish inshallah at 7 o'clock. However, if anyone wants to stay for other questions to be answered, feel free to do so inshallah.
Okay, so how do we know there's only one creator? If you've got 2 independent, unlimited creators who choose the ability to create or to destroy, what you'll have is a paradox. Does that make sense? A contradiction. If one independent, unlimited creator, infinite creator says, do this, and the other one says, don't do it, then what do you have? Who becomes the one that supersedes? They don't. So this is why we say, therefore, the creator has to be one. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in a verse of Quran that if there were many gods, you would see the universe, the heavens and the earth, in turmoil, in chaos. Because each one would want to impose its will, but they cancel each other out. So therefore, if we have a universe, if we have a necessary being, the necessary being, the creator has to be one and singular. The other point, which is this, I've got 1 minute and 40 seconds, he's very strict on me now. The other point is this, is that when you have 2 creators, you basically limit the creators. They're both limited by having 2. Because what you have is a body composite. You have more, when you have 1, 2, 3, 4, you have a composition. And any composition is always limited. So as an example, when we say an infinite sum of finite things, is that okay? Infinite sum of finite things. We say it's impossible. It's a paradox. As soon as you have the ability to add things up, then you have limitations. Now some people might say, yeah, but numbers, they go on forever. But imagine if you counted from 1 and you kept on counting. When you get to infinity, you never get to infinity. Even if you count forever, by the way, you'd never get to infinity. They would say it's finite but unbound. Every number that you land to will always be a finite number, will be a limited number. You can't transverse the infinite barrier. That's what they say, the finite barrier, to go from finite to infinite. So as soon as you start to add things up, you start to limit. And therefore, if you have more than one creator, you start to create these limitations upon the creator. It's not necessary.
We're going to have to skip some questions as well. The next question will be if the universe is uncaused, does it undermine science because science is the premise on a law of causality?
Yes, it does. So if scientists, I remember I was speaking to a postdoctorate in physics. When you speak to a postdoctorate in theoretical physics, you're thinking, you know what, you're not going to talk to him about physics and try to defeat him that way, or try to convince him that way. Because obviously he knows more physics than me. But he made this point. He said, in science, there are certain observations and conclusions that deny causality, is what he said, or seems to deny causality. And I made the point that causality is an axiom in science, has to be assumed. You know, for example, when we take water and put it in a beaker and we boil it up, what are you doing? You're applying the cause. What's the cause here? Fire. And what you're recording, the effects. What's the effect? Boiling of water. So when you look at the scientific method, it has to assume causality, has to assume it for it to work. For example, you take a plane, and what do aeronautical engineers do? Is they take a plane and put that plane in a wind tunnel, i.e. a smaller version of it. And then from that smaller version of the wind tunnel of that plane, they then scale it up. But it can be scaled up because of the principle of causality, and the idea that things have patterns within nature, and then we can identify. So if I conclude from a scientific premise, from a scientific basis, that you can have cause, so you can have an uncaused effect, then I undermine the science that it rests upon. Yeah? And therefore the whole scientific method and its conclusion becomes incorrect. By the way, if people want to raise their hands and ask further on this.
Has anyone got any questions? Just want to. Yeah, sure.
These particles came to be known as the Higgs boson. So these particles are mainly responsible for giving things, or giving the mass, weight. So, and this scientist said that without these particles, things in the universe lose weight. And as a result, the universe collapses entirely. So the universe collapses entirely. If these particles disappear, because weight will also disappear. So, this is how life ends. This is how science speculated the end of life. So it is through things losing weight. And Islam actually speculated in the Quran about the end of the universe in Surah Al-Qari'ah, where he said, يوم يكون الناس بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم القارعة ما القارعة يوم يكون الناس كالفراش المبثوث وتكون الجبال كالعهن المنفوش. So, Al-Qari'ah is basically translated as the calamity in English, and this is actually a speculation of the end of life. It's where people will be like butterflies, or in other words, they will be as light as butterflies, and they will be scattered in the air, and mountains will be like wool. And as you can notice, both wool and butterflies have this character of being light, losing weight. So this is how I feel like science actually can give true revelations that already existed in the Quran. Thank you very much.
Just a point of comment that I think the issue is this: is that we're not saying that science is bad and evil. What we're saying is science has a role, and it's a limitation towards it, which is the observable universe, and therefore we limit it to that observable universe. What other people, a lot of atheists do, is that they say actually science denies the existence of God, or that God can't be proven by science. And all our argument is this: is actually science has a role, and its role is not to answer this particular type of question in regards to that. Now there are interesting, verses of Quran which seem to suggest that it predates what modern science has discovered. You know, and you know, we can learn and read some of these verses of Quran. But I would say this: be very careful, which is two things. One, science changes. An example: embryology that's mentioned in the Quran. They used to interpret those verses in the Middle Ages according to the science of Galen. And then later on, in the 1950s and 60s, they began interpreting those verses in the light of modern embryology and rejected the views of Galen. Galen lived a couple of thousand years ago in Greece. Yeah. So science changes. Yeah. The verse of Quran don't change. The verse of Quran have the capacity to encompass multiple realities, and sometimes they can encompass a certain view about science and reality. Yeah. But we should be very careful as to definitively put that. As I mentioned before, science is not a definite subject, etc.
Next question. I reckon believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must be just through one's heart and blindly bowing to Him, than based on logic and scientific arguments. Any views on this?
Yeah, so,
We'll do 1 minute now, yeah?
yeah, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لِآيَاتٍ لِلْأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. Yeah, indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, the alternations of the night and the day, they are signs for a people of depth, of thinking, of understanding. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in Surah Al-Imran, verse 190. There are many other verses which talks about the reality, talks about the existence of things. أَمْ خُلْقُ مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ. Or do you think creation came out of nothing? Yeah? أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. Or do you think you are the creators? Do you think you created the heavens and the earth? بَلَا يُوقِنُونَ. Nay, you have no certainty. So many times the Quran addresses the mind of the person who's reading it, makes the person reflect upon the world around him, life around him, in order to come to certain conclusions about the signs for the existence of the Creator and the fact that the Creator is one. So there's many examples of this. So Islam does not demand just emotional blind following. Rather, it demands, as I mentioned, to have certainty in the faith, and the certainty is established through reflection, through thinking, and through rational thought.
Has anyone else got any questions? No, we'll take just a few more questions. The world was created in 6 days. Islamic perspective, why?
Okay, so in the Quran it mentions about the Quran being created in 6 ayam, 6 days, which is a plural of yom, days. However, we understand linguistically the word yom or ayam, days, does not necessarily refer to 24-hour period. Yeah, it could refer to periods of time of equal length. Yeah, or certain periods of time. And that's how we take and understand this particular verse of Quran. Firstly, it's something that we cannot directly sense, yeah, because we don't have the reality of how the universe was created. Whether this was before the observable universe that we observe today, or whether it is to do with the observable universe, we're not 100%. From the ayat of Quran, it's not clear for us. But what we know is that there were 6 periods of time, yeah, as mentioned in the Quran, that the universe and the heaven and the earth, that they were created. And that's what we accept and what we believe in. What we don't necessarily do, which is what other people do, or other religions do, is try to interpret in light of science. Yeah?
Let's take the last question. How do you actually 2 questions, I'm going to ask 1 more question as well. How do you explain proof of God to high school students in a simple way?
I don't think it's that complicated, the proof. Yeah? I don't think talking about the chain of events that goes back forever has to have a beginning chain is a complicated thing. But it requires thinking. And I think this is the problem sometimes, is that we're not used to it. Yeah? Maybe in our school, university, maybe in certain subjects we push ourselves. I look at GCSE maths now and I think, how did I do maths? Yeah, when some of the equations that you have to learn. Yeah? And I did A-level maths and I'm thinking, how did that happen? Or when you find a lot of people where they really focus upon, other areas and they go into the nitty-gritty. Oh, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, how did he change the tactics from Jose Mourinho? He created more counter-attacks, he created a solid defence, he put Matic and Herrera in midfield as a cover for Pogba. They go into so much depth, even as kids. They have their fantasy football teams and, they're all looking at the different point system that they have. Yeah. But when it comes to this issue about belief, about purpose of life, and I tried to explain at the beginning that purpose of life is something which is so important because it defines for us our viewpoint on life. And so answering this question should take you time, should force you to think deeply on the subject matter. Yeah? And if you do that, there's only one conclusion, that the Creator exists, and that also we believe that the Quran is the word of the Creator.
Okay, we'll actually take this question. Is it easier to convince atheists or people from other religions that they can accept God more easily but like retain previous beliefs?
To be honest, it's a good question. I think what it is, it's not about whether they're atheists or whether they believe in another religion. It's about whether they're open and sincere in looking at the question. Yeah? If you get a person that's open and sincere, they will be easily convinced. But if they're not open, if they're like strict atheists or a strict Christian, that's it, I accept it, I'm not going to accept any arguments, completely closed off, then it's very difficult. And that's where the skill of talking to people comes in. Because you need to make them think about and reflect upon the ideas that they hold. And make them think, actually, is there a possibility that I could be wrong? If they start to think like that, then you've got the opportunity. As soon as you get a person sincere and open-minded about belief in Islam, I tell you what, it's dead easy after that. It is really easy. It's that first part, getting them sincere, opening their mind towards that question. Actually, this is an important question. I need to look at it, I need to answer it, and let me look and study the arguments that Muslims present, or is within Islam itself.
So for any questions which have been dismissed because they're irrelevant, how can we get in touch with you?
Well, contact the Islamic Society. I'm sure they will pass their details on the questions on to me, and I'll pass it to them.
Okay, yeah, we'll close that. I just got one question as well. Final question.
Time up.
Not for me. So when you're speaking about the infinite regress, obviously it has to be an independent being, a necessary independent being. Why does that have to be God? Why can't it be, let's say, when they say matter, energy, some say matter, energy is eternal, matter is eternal, so why can't it be that? That's independent. And we'll give that 2 minutes.
What's interesting is that even atheists, when they turn around and they say that there is no eternal creator, have to invoke some sort of infinity or eternality. Yeah? So they'll say energy. So the first law of thermodynamics, which I'm sure everybody knows, first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, transformed from one form to another. Meaning that they say that energy is eternal. Or they will say that there is an infinite number of universes out there. Yeah? Multiverse theory. In order to explain why this universe has the properties that it has. Because all these other universes have different properties. So you have lots of atheists out there that actually try to believe in something that's eternal. Yeah? And what we're saying is that if it's eternal, it has to be eternal or infinite or independent in all its respects. It can't be eternal or independent in one and limited in another, because by definition it's limited. So energy is not eternal. How do we know energy is not eternal? Because it resides within the universe, and the universe had a beginning. Therefore energy had a beginning. Even if people say, yeah, but how do we know the universe began? We could simply say, we could simply say, well, actually the universe as an energy is defined by its equation. What's the equation for energy? E equals mc squared. When you have an equation, it's defined, it's limitation. Yeah? So these are things that are limited, and therefore they're dependent, that they exist. So the only thing you can point to is really an unlimited independent creator. And if it's really truly independent, it's not forced to create. It chooses to create. Because as soon as you say it's forced, it has to create, it means it has some, laws that are governing it. Not something which is independent and therefore choosing to create. I'll pass it over to our chair.
Just before we give it to our chair, if you guys got any questions, do go to our social media at MMUISOC and do ask it there. And if you want it to be anonymous, we do have the feedback forms, so you could ask on there as well and we'll take it as a question. And last thing, if you want our email instead to contact us through that, you can come to the front and I'll write it down for you, inshallah.
Brother Sharif, I believe, for the excellent presentation. So just to make an announcement for the talks that we have coming. So tomorrow, inshallah, there'll be Feminism, Masculinity and Gender Roles by Anna Hassan in Business Group. And on Thursday, inshallah, Introduction to Islam by the EF Dawah team, Hamza Mayat, Brother Imran, Brother Abbas. And on Friday, here is Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, by Brother Shabir Yusuf. Please bring your friends, please bring everyone, non-Muslims and Muslims. Thursday, inshallah, is the day where the brothers, the very knowledgeable brothers, will be able to answer the questions. So anyone that you know that have any misconceptions about Islam, any questions, Thursday is the perfect time. I hope to see you tomorrow, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.